My name's Sarah Edelman, and I'm going to talk to you about anxiety and how to manage it. And the first thing I want to say is that anxiety is very normal. We all experience anxiety at times. It's part of the human condition. Just a little bit about what we exactly mean by anxiety. So anxiety is perception of threat. So when we feel that something is unsafe or something bad could happen, we become physically aroused. Our body becomes prepared for action. And in the acute stage, when we feel that threat is immediate, we go into fight or flight response. But more frequently, when we're anxious, we're experiencing an ongoing vigilance response. And I'll just explain the difference between the two. So normally when we're perceiving threat, the amygdala, which is a very small structure in the center of our brain, sends an electrical nerve impulse through the spinal cord to the top of the kidneys, to the adrenal gland. We release adrenaline. Over time, we also release cortisol, and we become aroused and ready for action. And this is a process that can be seen on brain scans. We can see the difference between regular functioning and what happens in terms of neural activity when we get activated. There are physiological changes, and that manifests in the first instance in fight or flight response. And during fight or flight, we've all experienced it. We get an increase in adrenaline, which causes our blood pressure to go up. We breathe faster, we sweat, our heart rate goes up. There are all sorts of immediate physical changes. And most of us actually find it a very aroused state, sometimes unpleasant. But this is a response that we have when threat is immediate. So when you are about to give a speech, if you're nervous about public speaking, or when you're about to confront somebody, you may go into fight or flight response. But more typically when we're anxious, oh, and by the way, this is animals. You often see animals in fight or flight response. They're sort of vigilant, they're ready. You can sort of see that they're ready to run. But more frequently when we're anxious, it's a vigilance response. And it's almost like something in the back of our mind is telling us that we're unsafe and something bad could happen. And so we might sort of experience it like butterflies or an edginess or a nervousness or finding it hard to relax. Anxiety can be front of mind or back of mind. So sometimes when we're anxious, we know exactly why we're anxious and we're consciously thinking about whatever it is. But it's almost like we have these cogs in the back of our mind, so that sometimes even when we're not consciously thinking about it, there is something in the back of the mind saying it's not safe to relax, something bad could happen. So for that reason, we have this sort of ongoing vigilance response. It's like our antennas are permanently elevated even when we're not thinking about anything. And this is where we have our unresolved threats. So in the back of our mind might be things that still haven't been resolved, and it feels unsafe to relax. Now, that feeling that it's unsafe to relax happens on an unconscious level, so we're not even aware of this process, but it's like our brain is saying, don't relax too much. You may not be ready for whatever it is might happen. When we're in that vigilant state and we're not sort of completely relaxed, we're very prone to somatizing. And somatizing or somatic symptoms are physical changes in the brain, in the body that come from the brain. So somatic is in the body from the brain. And typically when we're anxious, we experience a whole range of possible somatic symptoms such as dizziness, wobbly legs, heat surges, neck or shoulder pain. We may get headaches, often tension headaches, difficulty breathing, fatigue, numbness or tingling, just feeling nervous and unable to relax, tremor, twitches, feelings of disassociation. It's almost like unreality. It feels like you're not fully present. You probably have disturbed sleep. You might have chest pain or tightness, nausea, irritable bowel, diarrhea, tightness in the throat, often tightness around here, tooth grinding, and TMJ pain. And there are different types of presentations when we look at anxiety. When we're experiencing anxiety, could be that sometimes you're in fight or flight response where your heart is really pounding and your blood pressure is high, versus more just a vigilance, chronic or ongoing type of preparation response. We can have normal anxiety, which everyone experiences, or it can be pathological, so it can be part of an anxiety disorder. It can be temporary or it can be chronic. We can have trauma-related anxiety, and people with a history of trauma tend to be anxious a lot of the time, or sometimes constantly find it hard to relax because the world just feels unsafe. Anxiety can be comorbid or coexisting with other mental health issues. So it's not uncommon if you have any sort of mental health problem, whether it's depression or I don't know, an eating disorder or a sleep disorder or bipolar disorder. Almost any mental health issue is frequently accompanied by anxiety. So anxiety seems to sit on top of many mental health problems. And then some people have anxiety sensitivity. And what that means is as soon as you experience anxiety, it feels like a threat. So the anxiety itself becomes a source of further anxiety. It's almost like you're trying so hard to avoid anxiety that it actually feeds the anxiety cycle. We call that high levels of anxiety sensitivity. Anxiety affects the way that we think, and it affects both the content of our thoughts. So when we are anxious, we think differently to how we normally think when we're not anxious. It also affects our thought processes. So when we are anxious, our thoughts are more scattered, they tend to be racing, we're less present. And so typically the content of our thoughts is biased towards danger. We tend to have more catastrophic thoughts, we tend to have more false alarms. And a really important thing to recognize is you cannot trust the content of your own thoughts when you are in an anxious state, because your thinking will be biased. You tend to be very focused on danger. You tend to have unrealistic, unreasonable, catastrophic type thoughts, but they feel true and they feel real. And also, of course, be aware that when you're in an anxious state, you're worrying more, you're overthinking, you're overanalyzing, you're often trying to solve imaginary problems, or, sometimes you're worrying rather than problem solving. And the thing about anxiety is it stops you from being in the present moment. So if you're having a conversation, or if you're trying to work, or if you're trying to read something, your thoughts are only partly there. A lot of your thoughts are scattered and going to all sorts of other places, which makes it hard to focus. And sometimes people, when they're anxious, say, I think I'm getting dementia. I think there's something wrong with my brain. And the actual reality is it's just that our thoughts become so scattered that it's hard to be present. Anxiety mobilizes the body for action, and it's actually telling us to do something. So anxiety is a survival instinct. It's about, you're not safe, do something. And so it motivates behavior to ensure survival and safety. And behavior can be helpful or unhelpful. So think about what sort of behavior you engage in when you feel anxious. And it might be helpful behavior, which often is problem solving, trying to think about what you can do to resolve a situation that feels unsafe. Or it might be just doing some relaxation techniques if there's nothing you can do. So they're examples of helpful behavior. But often the unhelpful behavior is things like avoidance, procrastination. It might be drinking. It might be overanalyzing and overthinking without actually doing anything productive. It might be just spending hours on screen time or avoidance strategies. So we know that that's not helpful because it's not solving the problem, but it actually just adds to anxiety and feels like the situation is still unresolved. Anxiety can be a motivator, and we know that a bit of anxiety is helpful, particularly in work situations or when we want to be productive. So this bottom axis shows arousal, and we know that as we increase arousal, performance tends to increase until we get to, I guess, an optimal level. And if you keep increasing arousal or anxiety, our performance starts to drop. We start to get burnout. We're not sleeping properly. We're not concentrating well. And the higher the arousal at the more extreme ends, the less productive it is. So anxiety can be useful as long as it's, I guess, within that sort of zone where we feel in control. So when we're looking at addressing anxiety, three main areas to address. And the first one is actually, what is it that's happening in our environment that is causing anxiety? And is there anything practical I can do to resolve that problem? So dealing directly with environmental stress. The second one is looking at the physical sides of anxiety, the physiology, the arousal that comes with anxiety, and directly using techniques to reduce some of that physical arousal. And the third one is changing the way we think. And this is quite a significant area. You're probably familiar with cognitive behaviour therapy, some of which involves challenging our thoughts. And we'll have a look at that briefly as well. So the first thing is environmental stress. So if you're feeling anxious because of a relationship problem or because of a health issue or because of some personal stressor that's been there all the time, always look towards problem solving. What's the best thing that I can do? How can is this something that's within my control or is it outside of my control? And if it's within my control, for example, it might involve things like if you've got a deadline for a task, you might work furiously over the weekend, not go out, just spend the whole weekend working so that you feel like you're on top of it. It might be talking to your manager if there's stress at work, or communicating with the relevant person if there's relationship stress, or it might be seeing your GP if you're worried about a health problem. So the first step, always look for solutions. Always think about, what can I do to change the problem? Is this within my control? And to the extent that it is within my control, is this something that I need to go and address? And often just dealing with the stressor itself directly can help to resolve the issue. We also have a number of arousal reduction techniques that we can use to physically reduce some of that arousal that we're experiencing when we're anxious. And the first one is exercise. Generally, physical exercise is one of the best things that we can do to bring down arousal. So if you're in a situation where you can do that, it might be going for a brisk walk or a run, or if you're at work and you're in an office building, it might be going up and down the stairs of the fire escape, if that's an option, or going out. Or if you're at home, it might be just doing some vigorous housework, mopping the floor, washing the windows, or whatever it is, but physically spending some of that energy. I'm going to talk to you just about a few simple techniques that you can use that are really helpful. And one is clenching your hands, as you can see on that diagram, and holding your breath at the same time, just for a couple of seconds. So you breathe in. You might like to do it with me now. Breathe in, clench, hold, feel your whole chest tight, and now breathe out slowly. Long, slow out breath. So always make the out breath longer and slower than the in breath. And then just take a few moments. It's useful to close your eyes at this point and just focus on the natural rhythm of your breath. So now you're breathing naturally for 20 to 30 seconds. Just take your time, focus on natural breathing. And I'm going to just do it one more time. Normally, if you're doing it yourself, just spend a little bit longer than that. But let's just try it again. So clasp your hands, breathe in, hold, and now long, slow out breath. Long, slow out breath, just releasing the tension in your chest and upper body, and releasing holding your hands. Your hands are still clasped, but they're totally relaxed. And now just closing your eyes, just focus on the natural rhythm of your breath. And once again, you would do this for about 20 to 30 seconds, just focusing on the breath. And so you repeat the clenching about 3 or 4 times, and you'll find that it does give you quite a rapid reduction in anxiety. And it's particularly good when you've got that sort of acute anxiety and you've got to go to a meeting or deal with something that's making you very anxious. We know that the breath is a really powerful tool for reducing anxiety, and there's different ways we can use the breath. Just calming breath can be just slow, rhythmic breathing. So counting 1, 2, 3, 4 as you breathe in, and counting to 4 as you breathe out. You can also do a longer exhale. So breathing in for 4 and long, slow out breath as you breathe out. And so you could do this just as a regular routine, just teaching yourself to use the breath to calm the nervous system. There's an app called Breathe to Relax, which is free, and I highly recommend it. It's you can use it to set the pace of your breathing, and it sort of gives you a choice of music and a little bit of a choice of scenery, and I think it's very good. So you can use that app as well. Just remember, it's Breathe #2 Relax, or one word, and that can also be very helpful for reducing anxiety using the breath. The other thing that is really useful is square breathing, and square breathing is a combination of breathing, meditation, and also imagery. So you close your eyes. You might like to do that just for a moment now. Close your eyes and see a square in front of you. And each time you trace one of the sections of the square or the outline of the square, you count 4. So you breathe in, 2, 3, 4, hold the breath, tracing the next part of the square, 2, 3, 4, breathe out, tracing the next section of the square, 2, 3, 4, and hold, 2, 3, 4. So we're breathing in as you do one side of the square, hold the breath as you do the next side of the square, breathe out as you do the next side of the square, and hold as you do the next side of the square. So we're tracing the 4 sides of the square. And this is actually quite a useful tool because it helps you to stay in that rhythm, and it also gives you something to focus on. It sort of gives you an anchor to hook your attention to. So most people find that quite a useful technique. You can practice that. There is all sorts of guided audio as well. If you want, you can just find online on YouTube if you want some guided audio. But a lot of people like to do this using their own rhythm, so you can experiment with either. Progressive muscle relaxation is physical. So when we look at mindfulness techniques, it's using the mind. When we're doing progressive muscle relaxation, we are starting with the body and using feedback from the body back to the brain via the vagus nerve, telling our brain that it's okay, it's safe. And there are a number of different types of progressive muscle relaxation exercises that you can do. You can start with the feet and work your way through all the major muscle groups, going up to your head, or you can start from the top and work your way down. You can tense muscle briefly, hold each section of your body, hold the breath, hold the tension, and then breathe out and relax. Generally, for most people, that tends to produce a deeper level of relaxation than just focusing on muscle and trying to relax, although different people have different preferences. But the key thing to understand with progressive muscle relaxation is we are going directly to the body, teaching our body to physically let go of tension. And by so doing, we are sending a message directly back to the brain saying it's okay. If you do progressive muscle relaxation on a daily basis and you do it repeatedly, you gradually teach your brain that it's safe to relax. So that is one of the favoured techniques that many people use. If you there's lots of guided progressive muscle relaxation exercises on YouTube and audio, Spotify and Apple Podcasts and so on. If you Google my name and relaxation, it'll bring up guided progressive muscle relaxation exercises on various, what used to be CDs. Now they're just available for download, and they're available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and I can't remember what else, but they're available free of charge. And there's lots of other really good stuff as well. And just self-soothing exercises. Sometimes people find some of these self-soothing exercises. I'm going to talk about mindfulness in more detail shortly, but also things like having a shower when you're really anxious. Just get in the shower, change your physical state, have a bath, do self-massage, help your body to relax. Things like a soft toy, a squish ball, just something to squish, or some of that really lovely, soft, fluffy clothing that you can now get, like those sort of very soft dressing gowns and sometimes nighties, or even using a smooth rock, using tactile devices to kind of calm the brain. And scents can be really useful as well. Scented candles or incense or scented oil. Lavender oil is very calming, or vanilla extract. Different oils that have calming associations can be helpful. And even visual imagery. So closing your eyes, seeing an image of something that feels magical or special, or from a happy time in your past. And you can, of course, use art or photos as well. In fact, photos can be a great prompt to just bring you into that image. And you can look at sometimes a picture online and then just close your eyes and see yourself in that place. So they can be useful techniques as well. Anxiety is very responsive to placebo as well. So anything that you associate as calming is helpful. So that can be smells, it can be lavender smells, it can be particular teas. I know some of the, thinking of rescue remedy or things that people hold to be sort of very helpful. There's not really much scientific evidence, but it doesn't matter if it's something that you associate as being calming or magic. Even a soft toy or something that you associate as calming can also be very helpful when you're feeling in an anxious state. So anything you have any sort of positive emotional attachment to can also help to bring down anxiety. Healthy lifestyle, of course, is important. We're really starting to understand the relationship between physical health and emotional well-being and psychological well-being. They're not two separate things. They're all, our mind and body are part of the same system and both benefit from the same things. So regular exercise, ideally on a daily basis, move, do things. Nutrition, healthy nutrition, staying away from processed foods, having fresh fruits, vegetables, legumes, Mediterranean diet, all of those things that are healthy, that we know are healthy. Getting into a regular sleep routine so that you go to bed and get up at the same time each day, having your regular winding down activities. We know that sleep is also very important for mental health. Taking some time out to do some relaxation or mindfulness activities and social connection. Those 5 things are really important for physical health and also for mental health. So you might want to think about healthy lifestyle. The other thing that is helpful that I'm going to talk about now is cognitive reframing. And cognitive reframing comes from CBT, cognitive behaviour therapy, and it's really changing some of our automatic thoughts. I mean, just because you think something doesn't mean it's true. And so just stopping and recognising that our thoughts are not always realistic. They're certainly not necessarily helpful, but sometimes they're just incorrect or biased. So asking yourself questions like, am I overestimating the danger? Am I getting things out of proportion? Am I believing that I can predict the future? Am I being flexible, or am I seeing things in black and white? Am I mind reading what others might be thinking about me? Am I putting unnecessary pressure on myself? Think of a sensible friend. What would they be thinking if they were in my situation right now? What's an alternative, more balanced view? What's good about this situation? I'm just focusing on the negatives. Is there anything good about this situation? Will this matter in 5 years' time? So these are just questions you can ask. And of course, whether or not they're relevant will depend on the situation that you find yourself in. If you have had any experience with cognitive behaviour therapy, you'll be aware that there are thought monitoring forms where you just log things like, what's the situation or the trigger? How am I feeling? What are my thoughts? How am I thinking about this? Are there any reasoning errors? What's an alternative, more balanced view? And there's all sorts of prompts for each of these, and problem solving. Is there anything I can do now to help myself? If you're interested in learning a little bit more about this, my book, Change Your Thinking, contains lots of examples and instructions on how to do this in I guess, in a lot more detail. So it might be something worth looking at. Also, just having people in your life who are who think in a reasonably adaptive, psychologically healthy way. Sometimes just having somebody that you have a conversation with and actually tell you. Sometimes some of our best therapists can be our friends or partners or family members, and they can actually persuade you that your thinking is not reasonable. So sometimes just having those conversations can be really helpful. I'm going to talk a little bit about mindfulness, because I think we've all heard of mindfulness, but there are different meanings and interpretations. And I'm going to focus on 3 key aspects of mindfulness, and that is paying attention, learning to focus your attention in one point, being more aware generally, and thirdly, allowing. So that is whatever it is that you're experiencing right now, just allowing that to be there. So let's have a look at a little bit more detail. So attention, when we think about mindfulness, we often think about mindfulness meditation. And meditation is certainly one of the components of mindfulness. It involves focusing on one object or anchor, such as the breath or sounds or body sensations, whatever it is that we're noticing, just turning all of our attention to that particular thing. And it's about training our mind to be present with one object or item at a time. But also doing this on a regular basis provides a platform from which we can start to observe the processes of our own mind. And so this is for people who have perhaps done a little bit more meditation and have more experience. You start to notice how your mind is going. You start to notice patterns. You start to notice some of the way that your mind grasps and moves in all sorts of directions. So that's why mindfulness meditation can be really helpful. But in addition to that, we can use, or sometimes as an alternative, we can sometimes just use more mindful awareness. And awareness is being present with ourselves in this moment. So noticing what's happening, and it might be, noticing what am I thinking right now? What's going on in the back of my mind? How am I feeling in my body? And how am I feeling emotionally? What body sensations are going on for me? What's my energy like? What's my mood like? There is so much happening all the time, and most of the time we're not switched on to it. So learning to observe our current experience and sensory input, just noticing thoughts without getting so caught up in their content. Most of the time we're having thoughts and we see our world through our thoughts. And with mindful awareness, we are having thoughts, but we're also able to step back and say, look at what's going on right now. Look at what my thoughts are doing. And it's an attitude of openness and curiosity. So watching with curiosity at what is going on inside of ourselves. And the third part of it is allowing or learning not to judge whatever it is that we're experiencing. And that's particularly important when we're experiencing something that's aversive or that we perceive as something that we don't want, or something we want to move away from. So rather than sort of resisting and wishing it would go away or wanting to push away from it, allowing is whatever is there, just being present with that and releasing the resistance. And this is particularly relevant when we don't have any control anyway. And here is a nice little example of that, which I just found on Google Images, when they sort of compare resisting to allowing. So resisting, it's raining, and resisting is, I don't like the rain. I wish it wasn't raining. My day is ruined now. Why does it always have to rain when I want it to be sunny? And allowing is, it's raining. Yeah. So it's dropping all the resistance, the rumination, the why does it have to happen? And it is what it is. We don't have any control over it. So relax into it. And another great metaphor that I find that it's really useful for this concept is when you're sitting in traffic. And I always remind people that you can have one problem or two. And the one problem, of course, is that you're sitting in traffic. You can't really get to where you're going until the traffic moves, and you're just going to need to wait until it moves to get to where you want to be. So that's the first issue. But the second issue is optional, and that's emotional distress. And that's the rumination and anger and frustration, and I'm going to be late, and this always happens. Why didn't I take the other route? Why did I go on this way? Gosh, that guy in front of me is just so slow. Why doesn't he creep up? So it's all that distress that we create in addition to the situation that we're in. And the point is whether or not we go in that direction and we start getting tense and annoyed or frustrated or anxious, it doesn't change our reality. It adds an extra layer of suffering. So learning to allow, it is what it is. Learning to allow, learning to, and for some people, just using this metaphor of sitting in traffic as a reminder that sometimes in life we don't have control. And that's okay. We can relax into that reality. One of the, I guess it's a Buddhist principle that suffering is the primary experience that we're having, but it's the emotional distress. Whether or not we suffer it will depend on the emotions that we have in relation to the situation, not just the situation itself. And in fact, often if you take away the negative emotions or the unpleasant overthinking and emotional distress, the situation is much more tolerable. Finally, I want to talk about some of the established habits that maintain anxiety and that feed anxiety. And if you're someone who has, I guess, a history of anxiety or prone to anxiety, it's really important to start addressing some of these behaviours. And the first thing is addressing safety behaviours. So safety behaviours are the things that we do to try and make ourselves safe. And with anxiety disorders, it's the things that we do to make ourselves safe that become part of the problem, that feed and perpetuate anxiety. And the first thing is avoidance. It's trying to avoid situations. So, for example, if we mightn't go to something that is anxiety provoking, or we don't participate, or we escape at the first opportunity, or we try to avoid certain people and avoid certain places. And in the short term, it does enable us to avoid anxiety, but in the longer term, it maintains those situations as a threat. We never learn how to get over those situations as long as we avoid them all the time. And we might avoid certain tasks, so we might procrastinate, or we might engage in lower priority tasks because we just don't want, we don't want to deal with those tasks. Or we might engage in things like over busyness and screen time. And all of those things are a form of avoidance as well. We focus on screens so we don't have to deal with other things that need our attention. Or we might try and avoid the physical sensations, the body sensations, through things like alcohol or drugs or food or gambling or sex or shopping, anything that kind of stops us from being present with our body or having to accept and deal with the unpleasant parts of anxiety. And other safety behaviours include things like social safety behaviours, so always just trying too hard to worry about how we are presenting to other people. We're self-centering or self-censoring or self-monitoring, over-preparing, being excessively checking, having unrealistic standards. All that perfectionism is also a safety behaviour. It's a way of trying to avoid criticism and trying to be the best. And it feels like if we do that, perhaps we can feel safe. Another really common set of safety behaviours are cognitive safety behaviours. That's things we do with our mind to try and make us feel safe. And that's the overanalyzing, overthinking, worrying, or what I call post hoc analysis, thinking about, okay, that interaction I had, that social interaction, is there anything that they said there that perhaps, what did they mean by that? Maybe I shouldn't have said that. So it's that analysis after it's already happened. And that's unhelpful, and it actually maintains anxiety. Or other things like sitting near the door, taking someone with you when you need to be somewhere, having telephone check-ins, checking in with another person, just reassuring yourself that they're still there for you, or that they're okay. Vitamin pills are common safety behaviours. Sometimes people just resort to cleaning as a way of kind of blocking or trying to feel in control, and also getting on the phone, using social media. All of that can be sometimes just a way of not having to deal with stressful situations. The problem with this, of course, is that it stops us from confronting our situations, and it means that we never really get over our anxiety. So avoidance and safety behaviours maintain threat perceptions because we never learn through experience that we can cope and that the situation itself is okay. The final thing I always remind people, particularly if you're dealing with a lot of anxiety, is that you become so inwardly focused or so narrow focused that you're only just focusing on, certain areas that feel like a threat for you. And sometimes it's important to remind ourselves you only have one life to live, and it's happening now. And every day is your last chance to live this day fully. And the problem is spending all of our mental energy focusing on things that can go wrong, or focusing on threat means we never learn to enjoy and experience the present moment. So think about lifestyle, think about other things that you can do with your life. And some of this is from ACT techniques. If you've done ACT, I'm sure you would have come across this. Just think about planning simple goals like partner relationships, parenting, friendships, family, education, leisure activities, spirituality, citizenship, physical health. Think about what's important to you and start planning goals to work towards those things. And don't wait for anxiety to resolve before you can get on with your life. Get on with your life now. Try and focus on other areas of your life. And after a while, anxiety tends to be less of a problem, or tends to diminish with time. If you're interested in reading more about this, my book, No Worries, A Guide to Managing Anxiety and Worry Using CBT, really is focused on anxiety and worry. But the other one that is very widely read is Change Your Thinking, 3rd edition. And that describes cognitive behaviour therapy and how we can use that for managing emotions, including anxiety. And also for teenagers, my colleague Louise Ramond and I wrote a book called Good Thinking. And again, it's cognitive behaviour therapy for managing stress and emotions. I hope that what we've talked about today has been helpful. I hope that you can enjoy some of the techniques that, or you'll find the techniques that we've talked about useful. And as somebody who used to suffer from anxiety and doesn't anymore, I really wish everybody most sincerely the very best with managing anxiety.